Welcome to the State of Us podcast with Ian O'Doherty, proudly brought to you by Rivada Space Networks. They're pioneers in secure, next-generation global communications, and with their revolutionary outernet technology, Rivada is redefining connectivity. They're delivering ultra-secure, high-speed data transmission for governments, for businesses, and for you. Rise above the clutter of the public internet with Rivada Networks, and learn more at rivadaspace.com. Now, let's get on with today's conversation. And welcome to the State of Us with Ian O'Doherty. In the latest episode, it's my pleasure and honour to welcome renowned Irish novelist and all-round good egg, John Boyne. John, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
You're just back from a book signing tour in France.
Yes.
The life of the glamorous novelist. And you've just cycled up from a reading of Ulysses in Meeting House Square.
Yeah, that was quite fun.
The life of the pretentious novelist.
Well, they gave me a section to read. I was happy to read it. It's a good audience.
Well, first of all, you're on to your, 22nd?
I think it's 22nd. Yeah, 18 for adults, 6 for... Oh, it's more than 22nd then. 18 for adults, 6 for young readers, short story collection, and a picture book. So that's 24, 25, 26.
26. Busy boy.
I have been busy. It started in 2000. So, yeah, that's quite a lot, actually.
So you put up a lovely picture. You're on a train in France, going to the event. You held up the cover of the book. So tell me about it. It's called Air. Give us some context.
It's the fourth of a sequence that I started publishing 2 years ago. The sequence is called The Elements. So it started with water, then earth, then fire, and finally air. And the whole sequence looks at sexual abuse from 4 different perspectives. So they're standalone stories, but a minor character from each becomes the narrator of the next one. So in water, it's about a woman who is questioning whether she has enabled these crimes to take place. The second one, Earth, is a young man who is complicit. He films a rape taking place and does nothing to stop it. The third one, Fire, is from the perspective of a perpetrator, and it's a woman, a middle-aged woman who abuses young boys. And the final one, Air, is from the perspective of a victim/survivor. So I'm looking at 4 different incidents of sexual abuse in 4 different ways, and I guess trying to understand it from those perspectives.
Well, it's interesting. This has brought me onto something that I was going to wait until deeper in the interview, but now that you mentioned it, you, of course, were in Terenure College. We're the same age. I was in Temple Ogue, you were in Terenure. We both there leaving in 1989. And what's dogged Terenure College for the last few years was the absolutely horrific abuse committed by that monster John McLean, sorry. And how I do think our generation is kind of scarred a lot by that. And I think it's the reason why a lot of sort of Generation X kids who became adults, they don't really talk. We're not necessarily great communicators and stuff because people just didn't speak about it. But how prolific was it when you were growing up? Was it just, because I just saw it as it was an avoidable menace that you tried, you didn't allow yourself to be in the same room with certain teachers and certain priests. But it was like in the same way that you wouldn't go into a garden with a snarling dog. It was a self-preservation thing rather than, hang on, this is really wrong.
I can only speak from how I felt at the time, but in the years I was in Terenure College, I felt like it was just part of the school. I think I was very young for my age, even. I was quite naive, very innocent kid. And I felt that whatever happened there was just part of growing up. You couldn't question it, whether it was the physical abuse that went on in terms of like beatings, or whether it was the sexual abuse. It was just part of the day-to-day. We knew who was doing it all the time. We knew who was the new pet for which teacher or which priest, and it wasn't always priests. It was like John McLean was a lay teacher, and the teacher who abused me was a lay teacher. The teacher who beat the crap out of me was a priest. But we knew who was doing different things, and the weird thing, I've talked to my friends since about this, and for many years afterwards, when we would go out for drinks, we would sit down and we would, we might see each other a couple of times a year from school friends, and we would talk about it, and we would almost make a joke. Not almost, we would make a joke of it. We would laugh about it and say, "God, can you imagine?
Do you remember such and such?"
Yeah. Do you remember when he did this? I remember when this happened, and we sort of laughed it off, as in that it was a joke, rather than actually facing up to the fact that this was actually something incredibly serious that was happening. And if it was happening to one of our sons or daughters or nephews or nieces, that we would be taking it a lot more seriously. And it was only laterally that we did. I mean, one of my closest friends, one of my oldest friends, was one of the 23 guys who took the case against John McLean, and was one of his victims. And I was in the courtroom when McLean was sentenced. I was one of his support people there that day. And there was guys who were 10 years older than us and 10 years younger than us, all in the courtroom, who had been part of the 23, all coming out. One of the things I really, which I did not know before the day, but I really admired it in the courtroom, was that when the judge was sentencing him, she didn't sort of sentence him for the totality of the cases. She went through each case, and it would be, boy A, boy B, and so on. And for each boy, it would be that crime was at the higher end of the middle level of abuse, and for that you get X amount. And all sentences were related to the year in which it happened. So if you could only get 3 years or something for that in 86 or 92, whatever it was, so be it. But it meant that each of the 23 people
knew that they'd held account.
Yes, and that they were a very specific part of the sentence that he got. I thought that was a really good thing, actually, that I'd never known about. And then subsequent to that, of course, that set the ball rolling for, myself and 12 others took a case against a different teacher, and a bunch of people who had been abused by John McLean then took another case, which also then went to court, and he was further sentenced to, and so on. So each of those cases led to more people, I guess, coming out and feeling that they could go to the guards and have their...
Well, the dam had burst, really, hadn't it?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
The dam of silence, and the Irish are very good at silence.
Yeah. And I think the fact that everybody who had gone through it, was saying that they had a very positive experience of going to I know I did, of going to the guards, being able to tell the story and say to them, look, I'm coming now all these years later because I was in that courtroom, and I just feel like I should just sort of tell the story. And, if you feel there's something to be done on this, fine. If it's too late, if I haven't said enough, if it's not enough, fine. But every story that is recounted adds to all the other stories that are recounted. And I felt very listened to.
Well, there was a very good friend of mine was in class with you in turn year. He said to say hello, by the way. Obviously, I'm not going to mention his name, but he deliberately got himself expelled from Turner.
Right.
To get away from McLean.
It's interesting you say that, because over the last few years, I've got more in touch with people who I haven't seen really since the Leaving Cert, some of them. And we've had these conversations, and we've talked about people who mysteriously disappeared. Maybe, like I remember somebody, and I won't name him, but after first year, who seemed to be definitely one of John McLean's pets, I would say, and who just mysteriously disappeared. And we all sort of now think, well, maybe he said it to his parents, and his parents were like, right, we're out of here. I don't know. I haven't seen the guy in all those years, but it does not surprise me. And that's interesting to hear that somebody actually deliberately getting themselves expelled.
Yeah, because he said that he couldn't tell his parents.
Yeah.
Because his parents they wouldn't have been the wealthiest parents in the class.
Yeah.
And they were working hard to pay the fees.
Isn't it interesting, though, that you'd rather go through the trauma of expulsion and the shame and the really pissing off your parents
and the arguments and, being told that he was a disappointment to the family and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to him, so why did you tell them? And he went, come on, kill me mother.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Which was a very brave and noble thing for him to do.
But you couldn't back then, like you said, with the same age. Like the idea of actually saying it to parents was I mean, it was inconceivable, the idea of doing it. It would just have been, it's not that they wouldn't have believed us, but I just couldn't have imagined having the courage at that time to say it.
Or the vocabulary.
That's a better way to put it, yeah. Or the vocabulary. And I definitely would have felt in some way that it was my fault.
And again, because we're probably the last of the generations to be brought up to think that the teacher was always right.
Yeah, and that even if they were wrong, the system itself was saying that they were right. That and you couldn't go up against that. That you just had to. That was just a matter of, law almost.
And yet, funny enough, when I grew up, and I remember talking to my father about it. My father said to me one day, because there was some stuff came out of my school, and he said, "Was there ever anything like that with you?" And I said, "No, thank God." But there was an issue with some of my friends, and he said, "Why didn't they tell their parents?" And he said, "What are you meant to say when you're 15, when you're 14, when you're 13?"
Yeah.
And
you're too embarrassed to talk about anything that's related to sex anyway.
At all.
So,
and it becomes this internalized victim blaming.
Yeah.
You're almost kind of blaming yourself. But safeguarding measures seem to have gone through. But I do think that's Ireland's kind of secret shame. And it was only as my father got older, he told me about his experience in school. And he couldn't talk to his father.
Yeah.
And it
goes back and back and back.
Generational kind of omerta.
Yeah.
That allowed it to fester.
But, things have, like, I've gone into a lot of schools since my first young people's book, Striped Pyjamas, was published in 2006. Every so often I'll go into schools, and the atmosphere in schools is completely different than the atmosphere that I knew. I always say that when I went into Terenure, every morning I was on high alert, from not just with the teachers, but with the other boys. Yeah, I was just on high alert all the time. I go into schools now and I don't get that sense in the air. Kids seem happy. Teachers seem happy. My teachers were not happy people for the most part. I always want to say, there were some who were really good and who were trying to educate us and doing their very best with us. But most of them, I'd say, just seemed absolutely miserable. I look on the walls in schools when I go in, and it's filled with creativity. It's filled with drawings from books that they've read, or projects, history projects, or so on. In my day, it was, pictures of the Pope, things like that. I just feel like we live in such a better country now than we did then, and kids going through school have a much better experience.
It's one of the things that the older I got about one particular teacher, the more angry I became, because at the time we liked him because he used to warn us not to go in to a room with certain priests. He'd say, "Don't go in there on your own." And there was one particular priest who was very into, and we were rugby playing school as well, so, if you had any sort of a calf strain, he'd insist on giving you the rub down, the usual kind of stuff.
Well, that's what Mr. McLean was. Of course, his nickname was Doc.
Yeah.
Because he was the doctor as well.
But we used to like this particular teacher to say, "Don't come in there on your own," make up an excuse, and, and I went from liking and respecting him to kind of despising him.
Yeah. I know why, as you're telling that story, I'm thinking the same thing. I'm thinking, if I knew, the one thing about these 4 books is, the elements of complicity that's involved. If you know something is going on, don't say to the kid, "Don't go into the room." Go down to the Garda station and tell them, go to the principal, go to the parents. You can't expect a 12-year-old to take on this responsibility for self-safeguarding. If you know it's happening, I'm sorry, you're just as culpable.
And in a weird way, it seems almost worse, because you can't blame a snake for biting you.
Yeah.
I know the crime isn't worse, but morally it just seems reprehensible that if you know.
Well, to me, it's the same. It's exactly the same. If you know, then you're allowing it to take place, and to me, that's the same thing.
Yeah. Now let's cheerful stuff.
Yes.
It's lovely.
It's a lovely summer's day.
Yeah, it's a lovely summer's day. No, so we'll move on to something much lighter and more cheerful. The Holocaust. I loved The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas. And I was saying to you, and it was actually the kind of book that, and there's very rare that you get it where, for people you like, you buy them a copy. and you go, here, have a read of this. Right? I thought it was really, really sweet. I wasn't that mad about the movie, I'll be honest. But what I always remember is that I read it in one sitting on a flight to LA, just cover to cover, and it made the flight, and I hate flying and I hate long haul flights, but it made the flight pass so well, but it's interesting that an Irish Catholic writer takes on probably the most controversial subject in contemporary literature, which is the Holocaust, or the Shoah. So what brought you to that decision? Is it just were you, because I was always fascinated by the Holocaust and as a kid, right? Some people don't really care, but just from the time I was a child, I think it was probably when I saw the Holocaust TV miniseries or something, and I've met survivors and I've gone to Yad Vashem and, and so I know why I'm really interested in it, but I'm always curious to find out why other people are really interested in it.
Okay, so for me, it starts in the mid-'80s, and it starts on the last day before our summer holidays from school. And strangely enough, and this is not a good thing, but it's just the truth, that same John McLean, my English teacher, on the last day of school, he came into the classroom and he read out a list of about 40 books. And he said, over the summer holidays, read some of these. I'm not going to test you on them, but if you're looking for books to read, these are good books. And they were all books by writers I'd never really heard of. I was a books person anyway, but they were kind of the books leading into adult books that I hadn't quite approached yet. And one of them was Primo Levi, the first of his autobiographical books. And it was the first book.
The Periodic Table or The Drowned and the Saved?
Periodic Table, I think. And it was the first one I read from that list that he gave out. I remember going on my bicycle to Stillorgan Shopping Centre the next day on the first day of the holidays to buy it, or to look at the books in the shop. And I just chose that one. And it started an interest in me from 15. And over the years that followed, it was a subject I went back to time and time again in my reading, both fiction and nonfiction. And as I got older, started watching documentaries. And the years I spent 7 years working at Waterstones on Dawson Street. And when there was new books on the Holocaust, it was just something I would go back to, always trying to understand it, trying to learn more about it. So by the time I came to have the idea for the book, which I wrote when I was 33, I'd spent 18 years reading about it. And I think I was as pretty well clued in on the subject as kind of a lay person can be on it at that point. And it's one of the things, sometimes critics of mine or critics of the book have this, the way they invent these lines and these things that they say are true and they're completely false. They say I did no research on the book whatsoever. I did 18 years. I just don't call it research. I call it, just learning about it. I call it 18 years of education on the subject. So when I came to write the book, I knew what I was talking about. I knew my subject pretty well indeed. And that's where it came from. And for me, I was sitting down writing I'd published 3 adult novels, and it was my first book aimed at young readers. I was effectively just, I thought this is a children's book. I didn't weigh up, I suppose, the consequences of writing it. I didn't think it was going to become what it became. My first 3 books had been published, but they hadn't been, hadn't set the world on fire or anything. These was the days when, Irish writers were not immediately kind of given the keys to the kingdom. You had to earn it a little bit more than you do today. And I thought the book would come out and, might find a readership and I'd get on to writing the next thing. But it became something else entirely. It became The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, and my life changed. And 20 years later, it's still a book people talk about. It has its massive supporters. It has its massive critics. But I don't mind that. I think a good piece of literature should be open to criticism. I don't always think the criticism is fair or just. I think some of it is probably okay, But it was written by a 33-year-old in 2004, not by a 53-year-old in 2025, which would probably be a very different type of book.
But this is the thing about the criticism that I could never understand, was that there's a real empathy and humanity that sings off the page in that book.
Yeah.
And which is very difficult to do when you're talking about a death camp, and the commandant's family's complicit and the discomfort with the in-laws, with everything that's going on.
Yeah.
And that's what brings the humanity into it. It's not just this Manichaean, monster.
Well, also, I always say it's a novel about friendship more than I use the word Holocaust. It's the friendship between Bruno and Shmuel, the fact that both are the same age, born on the same day, 15th of April, 1934, my own father's birthday, same day, same month, same year. They're mirror images of each other at that fence. That fence is acting as a mirror. And there, but for the grace of God, effectively goes, one or the other. One is theoretically on the safe side, one is theoretically on the dangerous side. It's very much a novel about friendship. It's very much about empathy. And some of the things now which are said about it, the lies effectively which are promulgated about that book and about some of the things that have been said about the book are frustrating at times. If I could, do you mind if I point one out?
No, please, far away.
The biggest lie that is spread about the book is about what the Auschwitz Memorial said about the book. And what my critics, and there are a number of them, I suppose, online, they say, that the Auschwitz Memorial said that, it was absolute rubbish, that it should not be read, that it's just the worst book ever written type thing. And that is not what they said. What they said was, and I think I have this almost word perfect, they said that the Boy in the Striped Pyjamas should not be read by those who are studying the Holocaust. That is the full extent of their remarks. I never wrote a textbook. I never wrote a school book, a university book. I did not write a book for students. I wrote a book for readers. So what they're saying, and I don't disagree with them on it, is that if you want to study the Holocaust, perhaps don't start with a book that was a novel published for children. Maybe start with how I started, with Primo Levi, with Elie Wiesel. Maybe start with Anne Frank. Maybe start with nonfiction. So it's ludicrous for people to suggest that there was some spat between me and the Auschwitz Memorial, because categorically that never, ever happened. They made that remark that it should not be studied, should not be read by somebody studying the Holocaust. And that was the end of the conversation.
But this normally you can predict a literary row before it happens. So you can see when somebody says something or writes something and you go, oh, this is going to kick off big time.
Yeah.
It certainly took me by surprise, took most people by surprise. It must have completely floored you. And
that criticism?
Yeah.
Well, not least because it came 14 years later. And but not coincidentally, I think uncoincidentally, that it came only a year after the drama over My Brother's Name is Jessica. So I don't think in my mind the two things are unconnected, personally. But, 14 years of a book being beloved around the world, and then a criticism, and it's still beloved. Everywhere I go, people tell me how much they love The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas. But the one thing I will stand by, and I'll take this to my grave with me, is for the last 20 years, generations of kids around the world through school have been reading The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, and they have got some insight into the Holocaust, right? And a lot of those kids will have gone on then and decided, right, I'm interested in this. What should I read next? And isn't that by itself a good thing?
Well, that's how we learn.
Yes. So, I honestly feel that criticism is wrong. I do. And I know that, there are some organizations that you cannot criticize. But I'm sorry, I am incredibly proud of The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas. I'm incredibly proud of what it's done. I'm incredibly proud of what it says.
Is it did the criticism, which I have to say, if I was you, if I'd been in your position, I don't know whether I would have been very hurt or incredibly pissed off, or just a combination of both. But was a lot of the criticism, do you think, because you're from an Irish Catholic background and this isn't your turf?
I don't think so, because one of my closest writing friends is Marcus Zusak, who wrote The Book Thief. And The Book Thief came out the same month as Striped Pyjamas. And Marcus is Australian. So we're both outsiders, and Marcus doesn't get the kind of criticism that I get. He doesn't get the abuse online that I get. He doesn't get a memorial criticizing him in that way. To go back to where you started there on that, I would say I was a mixture of hurt and pissed off. Hurt because I know how hard I've worked over the last 20 years, going into schools for free, talking to kids time and time again about the Holocaust, ending every classroom session with something along these lines. Now, if you enjoyed this book, if you were moved by it, here's the books you should read next. I must have gone into, 1,000 classrooms around the world over the last 20 years and done that. So I have absolutely nothing to reproach myself for, and nobody will ever convince me that I have.
But again, I still can't understand the motivation behind the criticism, because it introduced a generation of children to the greatest crime in history.
Well, I have my own theories about it, but...
Go on.
Well, it was a tweet, right? Now, it's as absurd as it sounds, the Auschwitz Memorial making a tweet. A tweet is done by a person on a phone making that tweet. Now, who is that particular person on that particular day, on that particular morning? As I say, over the 12 months before, I'd come in for a lot of criticism from a lot of people, a lot of younger people, shall we say, over my views on, as a gay man, my views on LGBT rights and my views on the whole LGBT idea, the concept of intertwining these two things which have no connection to each other whatsoever. And I don't know who the person is who was sitting on that phone on that particular day. So,
is this a hit job, do you think? That then just spiraled and gained traction?
Well, I don't know how much traction
when it came out.
I don't know how much traction it ultimately gained, because my royalties over the last 5 years have not been any different than the 5 years before for that particular book, Striped Pyjamas. You know, it still sells all over the world every year. In every country, it's still published in the 60 languages that it was published in. It's still the most translated novel by an Irish writer in the history of Irish literature. So, didn't do it any harm in the fullness of time.
It's interesting you say that it might be a hit job due to an unrelated thing that we'll get into now in a second, because I could genuinely never understand how a book that was so warmly received and so beloved by so many people all of a sudden became this terrible manuscript.
Also, for the 13 years leading up to that, I wouldn't even know how many Holocaust memorial museums I was invited into to speak, and did all over the world, including in America, for example, where there are so many Jewish community centers, more scores, 100 maybe, all over the world, all of whom would tell me how much they loved the book, how much they admired the book, how much they admired me for writing it. And I remember in London, a Holocaust Society who, subsequent to the Auschwitz tweet, basically took me to task and, said what a monster I was. They'd had me in 3 times over 13 years to give talks in the evening. 3 times. And every time told me, how much I had contributed to Holocaust education. The German government gave me the Gustav Heinemann Peace Prize for what I had done for Holocaust education. I don't understand how all of these organizations for 13, 14 years thought I'd written something so wonderful and so thoughtful and so engaging with the subject. And then, one morning, all of them woke up and realized they'd all got it wrong.
And is it your theory that a lot of it had to do with my brother's name is Jessica, and this was a whack job, basically?
My theory isn't that a lot of it had to do with it. My theory is that all of it had to do with it. 100%. Absolutely.
But to drag such a beloved book into such a toxic argument, that's just...
Look, I could be wrong. But the timing seems very peculiar to me.
And so, what did you think of the movie, by the way?
I liked the movie. I didn't write the script, but I worked on it with the director who was also the screenwriter. I was out there. I like the movie, I like the play, I like the ballet, I like the opera. You know, that's 4 other media that book has been translated into, as well as the languages, and that people will have seen in different forms. I think my favorite one is the opera.
Really?
No, sorry, the ballet. The ballet. I had never been to a ballet in my entire life, and I went to the ballet, and this is going to sound how stupid I am. I was like, we were 10, 15 minutes into the ballet, and I turned to my agent, and I kind of whispered to him, "Is it all dancing all the way?" I thought it was more like musical theatre. I thought there was like they'd be dancing and then they'd stop dancing and they'd talk, but there's no talking. That's how stupid I am. But I loved the ballet because I was watching my own book translated into this form, this dance that I couldn't even conceive of, and I got very involved in it. I thought it was terrific.
Fantastic. And for a guy who just wants to write books,
Yeah.
and who wrote what for me is one of the most tender and extremely moving at the end. Would you call it what, a young adult novel, The Boy in the Stripe?
I did when I published it first. I don't anymore. I just call it a novel now, you know, because it did spread out between kids, young adults and old people. So I don't really define it that way anymore. I just call it a book, just a novel.
And that walked into a world of unexpected hurt, right? Because as I said, I read it in a single sitting on a flight to LA, and it passed the flight so quickly, and I loved it. And as soon as I finished it, I handed it to my wife, and she started it, and she loved it. So the criticism, I always thought you must have just pissed off somebody very powerful behind the scenes, and they were sort of trying to settle scores with you or something, because it didn't make any sense to me.
No.
And it did look like there was an agenda at play, because how could something that was so beloved for so long all of a sudden become a toxic tract? And it's interesting then that you mentioned my brother's name is Jessica, because I was going to go into that now in a second anyway.
But as
I'd no idea.
But as I said, the good thing is it actually it continues to sell in the same quantities it always sold, and it will. You know, and 100 years from now, I don't want to sound arrogant, but 100 years after I'm dead, people will still be reading The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas.
Yeah, well, with The Boy in the Striped Pyjamas, John, you've earned the right to be arrogant.
Yeah.
You know, so never apologise for that.
I don't apologize for that. I don't apologize for the book. As I said, I believe in it, and I'm incredibly proud of it. And I know it will outlast all my critics.
Absolutely. And so then you ended up in what's probably a rather more predictable, but no less absurd pylon from lunatics.
Yeah.
And it showed it was in the midst of the madness of that particular age as well. You know, I mean,
it was at the kind of the start of it, and it hadn't quite reached peak madness yet, but it was in the early days of it.
So tell me and tell the viewers a bit about My Brother's Name is Jessica and what happened.
Well, that book was published in 2019, so 13 years after Striped Pyjamas. A lot of books in the meantime, no controversies. Everybody seemed to like them. There was no dramas. 2019, I published my 6th young adult novel, and it was on the subject of transgender people. It was narrated by a 12-year-old boy whose older brother, Jason, announces at the end of the first chapter to his parents and to the narrator, Sam, that he believes he's a girl. And Sam, our narrator, has always looked up to his older brother, who is this very sporty guy, has the most beautiful girlfriend in the school. Everybody loves him. And the journey of the book is Sam's. It's not the Jason who becomes Jessica. It's not his story. It's Sam's story. It's Sam going on this journey over a summer where he starts the book feeling embarrassed, ashamed, appalled, horrified by what his brother has announced. And he goes on a journey where by the end of the book, he realizes that his brother Jason, now his sister Jessica, is exactly the same person that he always was, just with a different name, a different identity. He's the same kind, loving, wonderful person that Sam has always known. So while Sam behaves badly through the book at times and is unkind, it's because he's figuring it out. It's a novel. If I started the book and everybody said, well, that's great, good for you, what am I supposed to do with the next sort of 200 pages? It's about the journey from bigotry, I suppose, that a 12-year-old could have, to kindness and acceptance. And it is probably the most empathetic book I've ever written. It's a book filled with kindness. But from the day it was published, it just became this touchstone for, to use your word, lunatics, who just wanted to scream and shout at me. And did.
And were you expecting that?
No, because because firstly, I'm gay. So if there is, I don't accept the concept, firstly, of an LGBT community, because gay and lesbian people are same-sex attracted. Transgender people believe they were born in the wrong body. There is simply no connection between those two things. You might as well connect gay and lesbian people with electricians or with circus performers. There is no connection between the two. But as a gay man, I thought, well, people claim that there's this community, right? So I can write this book without anybody kind of hassling me about it. I know what it is to be sort of in a minority and to feel that you have to tell your parents something that is difficult to tell them. By 2019, I was like a loved novelist. Like, none of the Striped Pyjamas dramas that happened, nobody had ever had any problem with me. I was, perfectly friendly to everybody, and people were perfectly friendly to me. And also I knew the book, and I knew this was a book about love, and a book about kindness, and a book about understanding. And the drama really happened because of an article written in the Irish Times. I had written an article in the Irish Times about the book. I was invited, as you often are when a book's coming out, do you want to write 1,500 words about what the book is about? So I wrote that 1,500 words, and it was all perfectly normal and undramatic. But the final paragraph, I mentioned, it was almost an off-the-cuff statement at the end. I said that this word, which I had recently started to hear people bandying around, cis, that I didn't use that word myself. I didn't like the word. I didn't consider myself a subset of my own sex. That I understood a transgender person saying they're trans, but I'm not a cis man. I'm just a man. Any more than I consider that I would define myself as a gay man or a bald man. That, like, I don't need all those words. I'm just a bloke, right? And that was the thing that set people off. And a trans woman wrote a article, same length, in the Irish Times a few days later, which tore me and the book to shreds. But that same writer admitted in the article that that writer had not read the novel, had not read it. And I thought, this is insane. So somebody is saying, I haven't read this book, but I think it's terrible. And I think he's a monster for writing it. I think it was insane that that article was ever published. I don't think you can have an opinion on something when you haven't read it. And I do think that the person in question was looking to kind of build a little bit of a media profile by taking down somebody like me. And it didn't, it on one side, it worked in the sense that, it brought out this whole social media group that I was completely unaware of. These crazy people online, most of whom aren't trans, most of whom, frankly, are straight middle-aged men who have adopted this subject. Mostly
in lieu of a personality.
In lieu of a life, that they, well, and also to back up their own misogyny. When it comes to this subject, people always say trans women are women. When do you ever hear somebody say trans men are men? You never hear it. And the reason is because trans women are people who are born as men. Trans men are born as women. And who cares about the rights of women? We only care about the rights of men. So it's a men's rights activists organization. It's nearly always these straight middle-aged men who, quite frankly, I think have probably never got laid in their lives, who got rejected by women their entire lives and now see a way to put these women in their place. We will go into your bathrooms. We will watch you as you're changing. We will look at people like J.K. Rowling and we will tell her to stop talking, let the men speak, go away, spend your £1 billion, sail on your yacht and be quiet. That's what it's all about. It's about silencing women.
Well, the great thing from her point of view is that she has off money,
Actually, I would say the great thing from her point of view is on her worst day, she is smarter than any of them on their smartest day. She has never made a transphobic statement. Nobody can ever point to one that she made. Anytime, she's constantly being attacked online. She fights back with humor, with intelligence, with logic, with science, and nobody can take her down. She is uncancelable. I found myself to be uncancelable. They've tried for years and failed. My Brother's Name is Jessica became a bestseller. It was published in about, 20 languages. It won awards in some countries as one of the most compassionate books of the year. Another thing about these activists online is they're really just Irish and English. You don't get this kind of nonsense in France, in Germany, in Japan. You don't get it at all. You go over there, you don't have any of this.
It's very much a luxury belief, isn't it?
Well, it is. It's a middle class entitlement thing. It's what I always say is that right now there is so much going on in the world. There's wars in Ukraine, there's wars in Israel and Palestine, there's hunger, there's homelessness, there's people who have no money, there's people who are grieving. There are people with problems all over the world. And you know what one of those problems isn't? Their pronouns. When I hear a 25-year-old say, they want to be known as he, him, she, her, they, them, I think, do you even recognize the level of privilege that you have in the world? It makes me sick, frankly, listening to those people. They think that their lives are being somehow traumatized by you refusing to call them by something which is grammatically incorrect. You know what? Go fight in the Ukraine. Let's see how much they care about your zim nonsense. It's so middle class. It's so elitist. It's so privileged.
I the nature of my job as a journalist is that I'm inundated daily with emails from press releases, things like that. And I find the pronouns thing is really, really handy because as soon as I see he, him, or she, her, I just press delete. I don't have to read anything, So I'm actually kind of fan of that device because immediately it goes, whoever this person is, I want absolutely nothing to do with them.
I totally agree. In the States, before this sequence, The Elements, came out, my previous publisher, I was getting constant emails from he, hims, and she, hers. And I made it quite explicit to them at one point. I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I said, to me, this is, in an email, a professional email, asking me questions about, copy editing or jacket design or whatever it is. I don't want that kind of political statement any more than I want you to say, sign, Jim, vote for Trump or vote for Harris. Keep all that into your private life. I don't want any of this. And I said, I'm not going to respond from now on to any email that includes pronouns.
How was that received?
They kept doing it. So I fired them and I moved to a different publisher for the Elements in the States. I just had enough. I thought, I'm not doing it. These are political statements that you're making. And these are professional emails. If you want to have a political conversation with me, fine. Let's go to the pub, buy me a pint, and we can sit down and talk. But not when we're talking about, on page 43 of my book, did I mean this or did I mean that? Keep all of that out of the professional stuff, please. So yeah, I told them, right, I'm not going to allow you to publish this sequence of books.
And it's interesting. As a straight man, nobody automatically expects me to align or sympathize with trans people, and that's fine. I have sympathy for them at a human level, but that's as far as it goes. But as a gay man, do you resent the fact that you're automatically kind of expected to be an ally? Because I have a few gay friends, it drives them bloody mad.
Right, I've got plenty of gay friends, as you can probably imagine. there isn't a single one, not a single one, who wants any part of this nonsense, this alphabet soup, LGBTQI plus.
Two-spirit now.
Two-spirit, and what's effectively saying is that over here, you as a straight man exist, and everybody who isn't straight is over here on the other side. We all hold the same opinions on everything, and you hold a different opinion on everything. It's just not the case. I'm not defined by my sexuality any more than anybody else is. I published this article in the Sunday Independent a couple of weeks ago about the Pride March, and how sick and tired I am of having pride flags thrown in my face everywhere, and straight people, for that matter, going into gay bars and taking up seats, to show that they're allies. And they don't even realize how patronizing they are. We live in a country where the gay men and lesbians can marry each other. We've had a gay Taoiseach twice. Exactly what are you allying to? What rights are we supposed to be fighting for? We've won all our rights. I remember when the equal rights marriage referendum was passed, I can't remember who it was, but somebody saying that, what are Irish novelists going to do now? We've sorted everything, the church, gay rights, abortion, divorce, all those things. Everything has been resolved. What are we actually fighting for? There was a thing I saw online a couple of weeks back of some sort of, 19-year-old girl with, pink hair and holding a sign saying, "Allow me to marry my non-binary partner." You can. Who isn't allowing you to do that exactly? And it's this victim culture.
I was going to get you onto that.
You have to be a victim. Anybody who, they're shouting about rights that they already have. In England, or the UK, I should say, when the Supreme Court a couple of months ago defined a woman, for example, and the trans rights activists, the men's rights activists, complained that rights were being taken away from them. And not one of them can define a single right which has been taken away. All the rights that existed for men and women continue to exist. Other rights are not being granted to them. They're not being given the right to go into changing rooms with little girls. They're not being given the right to take women's scholarships, girls' scholarships away from them. They're not being given the right to compete in women's sports. But those rights weren't theirs to begin with. They were looking for them, and the law court said, no, sorry, actually, all of these things are for women.
Yeah,
so you're not a victim. Stop playing the victim.
This is actually the thing. I think this is the crux issue that's often missed out in all of this. And it's not something I particularly want to get bogged down in, because I'd grind in and in, I'd Paddy and I'd Stella O'Malley and stuff, and
And it's not my hobby horse either.
No.
I've only written one book.
It's sort of omnipresent in the culture. You can't talk about popular culture at the moment without.
But I think that's gone down a lot. I think it reached peakness around sort of like 22, 23, and it's just not anymore. I think people are sick to death of it. I think we are all sick to death.
Well, I think it ties into, I think it was Ian McEwan who said it was the valorization of victimhood.
Yeah.
And it seems these days, and the trans is merely an indicator of it. It's one part of the wider gestalt, is that it seems that some people we have a generation maybe that would rather be a victim than a hero.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I can't understand that.
Well, it's just this total self-involvement. But you know who the real victims of all of this debate have been over the last 6 or 7 years? Well, women, yes, but also genuine transgender people who genuinely believe that they were born in the wrong body, who want to make some change to that, who want to go about their lives quietly, as most of us do, without, trying to spearhead some political movement, that look at these straight middle-aged men online who frankly make the activists look, they just come across as unhinged, most of them. And they don't want any part of this. They feel actually, this is not what I want to be. I need to just go to my doctor and sort out my issues and figure it out. And if I need to transition, I'll transition. But I just want to do it privately without the world screaming about it. And so I think they have been actually really damaged by this.
Well, the one good thing to come out of all of this was The Echo Chamber,
Ah, yes.
which is the funniest Irish book I've read in years. And it takes a lot to make me laugh out loud. And there were parts of it where I genuinely, lolled, as the younglings might say. I thought it was brilliant, and there were parts of it, and I can't take higher praise. There were parts of it that got so farcical it reminded me of sort of Tom Sharp.
Thank you.
And stuff like that. It was fantastic. But that whole thing really, the whole book about, I mean, we'll go into you can describe it in bullet points in a minute now, but it really did, it was so obviously a big two fingers to the ridiculous fuss caused by Jessica.
Yeah, it was the first.
It was very angry, wasn't it? It was a very angry.
I should have read the first draft. My editor definitely took it down a few levels. It was the first book I wrote after Jessica, and yeah, it was absolutely. I mean, when you go through that experience, the mistake that sometimes people will make is apologizing when they know they have nothing to apologize for. One of the reasons that those kind of activists still hate me is I refuse to apologize because I didn't do anything wrong. And I still think I did more for trans people with writing Jessica than they've ever done in their lives with their nasty little death threat tweets. But The Echo Chamber was, I wanted to point out how stupid all of this is, how stupid social media is, even though I'm on it, because I'm a hypocrite. How stupid it is. And I just wanted to make it funny. I knew that I had to make it a farce. If I made it serious, it would be very per me. I'd be playing the victim.
So and just very quickly, for anybody who's watching, just...
Oh yeah, so it's about this family, and at the start, the father of the family, he's like a BBC chat show presenter, and he tweets support to somebody he knows who is transitioning, but he uses the wrong pronouns, and then the world piles on him, and everything he does to try to make this better, he just makes it worse and worse and worse. But it starts from a moment of actual empathy on his part. He's actually saying, good luck to you. I'm in your corner. I'm here to help if you need me. But because he uses the wrong pronoun, he's basically a Nazi, bigot, right-wing, thug, blah, blah, blah. All the words that are thrown at anybody. And all the family members, though, are all using social media in different ways. And over the course of this week that the book happens in, social media takes them all down, effectively. They're all destroyed by it. But because they've spent all that time on the phone, they don't realize actually their family is the one that should be there to help them in moments of trauma. And eventually they do realize that. Eventually,
and they all end up in the police station together.
Well, they all end up the same night, in the police station arrested, and eventually their Wi-Fi gets cut off and all. And I set out saying I just want one laugh out loud line on every page and make it as ridiculous and silly as possible. And one of the proudest moments of my life was that book went to #1. And I thought, if I can say it, I really thought, fuck you, to everyone who had tried to take me down with the Jessica stuff. I thought, fuck you. This book is #1. What have you done with your life?
It must have been immense vindication.
It was amazing. I remember just that day, just feeling, the day I got the call saying it was in at #1, just thinking, I got it right, because I could have got that book badly wrong.
It was a tightrope.
Oh yeah, if I'd made it any kind of victimhood in it, it would have just gone. And I got the best reviews of my life in every newspaper for that book. Every review just said, love it. It's great.
So you've been the subject of two both bizarre and vicious pylons.
Yeah.
And
I'm still standing.
Yeah, but you always come across as a perfectly inoffensive, easy.
I'm a very cheerful, happy-go-lucky kind of guy, and I'm certainly a lot happier than the people who criticize me. And I just get on with my day, and I write. I'm always writing. I know how lucky I am because I love my job. I love it, and I know I'm good at it. And I have the good fortune to have an audience as well, and a publisher who's been with me for 20 odd years. And anytime these little dramas happen, sometimes maybe I'm my own worst enemy by responding to things or jumping into things, but they don't keep me awake at night. When I move away from it, I just get on with my day. I with my partner or with my family, or I'm down the pub having a pint with my friends, or I'm writing a book. And I just don't really think about it.
You see, one of the things, though, I found that's interesting psychologically is that if I'm in the newsroom and I've written a piece that the mob doesn't like, and I used primarily, it'd be letters. So, and I always know, I'd know, particularly back in the day before social media and stuff really took over, if I went in and looked at the pigeonhole in the newsroom,
Yeah.
and it was stacked, it was like, oh, Christ, but it didn't really bother. And we used to all keep the best hate mail that we'd get. We'd swap them in the pub on the Friday and say, have a look at this one and stuff, like, you know what I mean? Because there was a psychological distance. But when you're sitting at home on a Tuesday night watching the telly, and you're on the couch and you're scrolling through Twitter, and then you see people saying you're a bastard and I'm going to kill you, that feels much more intimate. So,
yeah, well, I don't. Firstly, I never search my own name, ever.
No, but even if they come after you.
So they have to actually at me for me to see anything. But most of the time, if I tweet something that I know will have some sort of, that there will be people who won't like, I mute it. So I don't actually see the notifications. You'll very rarely see me replying to anything because I just don't really look. And I think that's the way to keep myself healthy. Because in the olden days, like when I was writing Echo Chamber, I did back in those days, post Jessica, I was reading things and I was responding. And you are getting, you're getting death threats from people who are saying, I want to push you under a Lewis. if you're out and I see you, I'm going to kill you. And finishing them all with #be kind.
Always.
There are, there is that one part of me that's like sort of, like these people are just crazy and they're miserable with their lives. But there is the other part of me as a well-known author who thinks of somebody like Salman Rushdie getting stabbed on stage. And I have to admit, I have been conscious of that. I've been conscious at events that
have you hired security in your
in some places I've been asked, do I want to I haven't hired it myself. But in some places I've said, in Ireland, not in Europe, because as I say, you don't get those nutters there. But yeah, I've said, look, if you have a security guard, it wouldn't be the worst thing to have just in case. Because while for every 1,000 lunatics online who just want to scream abuse at you, and are genuinely just hoping that you'll notice them so they have a story for their friend down the pub, there could be just that one person, that one crazy. And those of the 999 are actually encouraging that to happen. They're encouraging that kind of violence. And they should be aware of that, but they're not, because they're not smart enough.
That's it. A really interesting point that you brought up there about Rushdie. Everybody was appalled when we saw it. But as an author who'd gone through threats from crazy people, and as you just, like, all it takes is one.
Yes.
How did Rushdie's attack in New York affect you?
It did. I don't know him well. I've only met him a few times, but it affected me in the sense of having gone through, say, 5 years of people screaming abuse at me online. Never in real life, by the way, I might add. I've never once had somebody come up to me in a pub, at an event, at a festival, in a bookshop. Not once, not a single time, and say something negative. But having had 5 years of people screaming abuse at me online, there was that part of me that thought, I do have to be careful. And my family said the same thing to me, because I've gone through this experience, particularly with a group of people who are not noted for their rationality, shall we say. So it did make me worried. I thought, like, what if that happens? And sometimes, I'm going to sleep and that thought will just pop into my head, and I'll sort of, without asking it to, I'll think about that. And I would say, sometimes now I look at people who maybe will go online and maybe post a picture, which is just abusing me and all smiles, and in Dublin, say, and pretending to be kind, loving, thoughtful people. And I think to myself, do you have any idea what could actually happen by you posting that? I saw a public representative do that recently. somebody who used to be a lady mayoress of this city publishing a picture like that online. A public representative
on the record.
Hazel Chu,
Right.
and who has
It
been
was a picture of you.
no, a picture of her with three other people, 3 other women in a gay bar, big smiles on their faces,
I saw it.
big smiles on their faces, and saying something abusive about me.
Yeah.
She has been subjected to despicable racial abuse over her years in the public eye. Now, if she or her idiot friends think going into a gay bar as straight people and sitting there, taking photographs and atting me in it and getting all their followers to abuse me is funny, it's not funny. It's actually risky.
Well,
She's putting my life in danger.
that was over the weekend, wasn't it?
It was about 2 weekends ago.
2 weekends ago. But what really shrieked out of the screen at me was they're in a gay bar, straight women in a gay bar, and it was very male behaviour by them, because this is an occupying force. We can go into John Boyne's home territory, a gay bar, even though we're not gay, and we can insult him from his home territory. We can do what we want.
And we can put it all online for everyone to see.
I'd be proud of it. And then if anybody criticises us, we'll start shrieking and talking about misogyny.
Yeah.
And the play was so obvious. That was the thing. It was really dumb. Like, there was nothing subtle or nasty. It was stupid Mean Girls.
Well, yeah. I mean, they're not the brightest, I think, but it's disgusting behavior. But I wish people like that would stop for a moment and think of what the potential effect of that could be, right? All they need to do is just not buy my books, right? But if I'm at an event or something, and something like what happened to Salman happens to me, people like that need to start thinking about their actions, because posts like that, and a post like that by somebody who has been herself a subject of so much disgusting racial abuse, it appalls me. I do not understand what could have been possibly going through her mind.
Well, I mean, I'm not sure there's much goes. Tumbleweed, maybe. I mean, she's consistently proved that she's not a particularly deep thinker, and that's putting it politely. But I mean, I just thought, my God, are you in the school playground? Is this what you were like when you were girls? And you've all decided that you were going to gang up on the gay lad.
And it was a week before I saw it. While they were sitting in that gay bar having their little hate fest, I was in the south of France with my partner, getting drunk and having a wonderful time.
So who wins?
I think it's 1-0 to me.
Yeah. But when you see things like this, not just that one, but when you see other stuff like that, do you get annoyed? Do you get offended? Does it kind of hurt? I mean, we're all human, No, because
it doesn't hurt me anymore, because I know those people have no moral compass whatsoever. It doesn't hurt me. It makes me want to explain to them, like I've just explained. What it does do, on the other hand, though, is when I see it happening to other people, it drives me crazy. And I'm very, very supportive of other writers, particularly, who get abused for having an opinion on anything. Right? I don't even have to agree with them. I just think when I see another writer being abused, it makes me want to defend them, and I do defend them. And there's there's a couple of writing Twitter accounts that run by basically people who wanted to be novelists and weren't able to be, and that they look for ways to attack writers. And they mention me a lot whenever I support somebody. And I know who's behind those sites, and I often want to say to that person, you're actually complaining about somebody for supporting somebody when they're down, for when they're kicked when they're down, saying, you know what, this person they're not a monster, they haven't murdered anybody, they're not Hannibal Lecter, and I'm just defending my friends, or I'm defending free speech, or I'm defending the right to hold an opinion. What exactly is wrong with that?
No, we do. I mean, look, we live in a society now where free speech is considered a right-wing belief, and it's portrayed as a right-wing belief. And it's,
Well, I don't think there is any right and left anymore, because the left wing that I used to know, I would have always considered myself, a left wing, tree hugging, commie gay, and the left is more right wing than the right wing now, because the left wing of the last 5 years have it's been so, if you don't agree with me, you're a Nazi. And that's the other thing that drives me crazy, is the use of the word Nazi constantly. Then only the Nazis were Nazis. And people talk about me trivializing the Holocaust. They trivialize the Holocaust every time they call somebody who doesn't agree with them on any particular subject a Nazi. The Nazis went out and killed millions and millions of Jews. The Nazis were not sort of doing the fairly trivial stuff that they're complaining about online. So stop using that word. Save it for discussions about the Holocaust.
Yeah. Well, I mean, language has become so trivialized because these people are trivial.
Yeah.
That's, I think, the reason. If you can invoke the greatest crime in human history into not letting a bloke go into the ladies' jacks.
Yeah.
Well, then, frankly, there's something wrong with you. And I mean, the way I look at those people, I've been called a Nazi at times as well, and I go, what? I get over to Israel every chance I go. I've got Jewish friends. I've been one of, if not the most pro-Jewish and pro-Israeli journalists in Ireland. And you still get Nazi. It's like, call me a wanker, right? That's fine. Call me whatever you want. But when you call somebody like me or any Irish person, unless they're part of the Irish Nazi Party.
Yeah, yeah.
When you call anybody like that a Nazi, all you're doing is you're displaying to the world that you've no intellect, you've no knowledge, and you've no morals.
And I think you lose the argument immediately once you go that road.
Yeah.
You just do. It's.
What is it? Poe's law? There's all these different internet laws. Might be Poe's law. That the first person, now I'm open to correction, and no doubt somebody will correct me. I'll be furiously checking this now as soon as we get it here. But there's a law, I think it's Poe's law, but I could be wrong, that the first person to mention the Nazis automatically loses the argument.
Unless you're actually talking about the Nazis.
Unless you're actually talking about the Nazis, But, so, what next for John Boyne?
New book. I'm always on to the next book. So I'm on the new book. I'm on the second draft of a new novel at the moment. And it's something much different from
Do you ever stop?
No, I don't want to, because I love it. I genuinely love what I do.
Are you one of those writers like 9 to 5 or do you...
No, I'm more sort of, what I always say is that it's not about a word count and it's not about the hours. It's about getting to the end of the day and feeling that I haven't wasted that day. So like today I knew I was doing this podcast, I was doing the Bloomsday event. So I was up early to get some stuff done on the book that I'm writing. I'll probably get a bit done later, but I'll know that for whatever free time I had, I filled it correctly. So it's not so much that, but I really just enjoy it. So, and like I said earlier, I recognize how lucky I am to be able to do it and to do it well.
Are you sort of a solitary person, the way a lot of writers are? That
I'm a bit of both. I love my solitary time. I love being alone to write. I need that. It's important to me. But then I love my partner. I love my family. I love my friends, and I love going on holidays. So once I'm out, I'm out. But when I'm in, I keep the head down. I'm actually good. When I go on book tours and stuff, I love going up. I love being on a stage or something and doing all the, talking about the books and talking about books I like and so on. And then I finish that and I'm perfectly happy to kind of go back to the hotel bar with a book to read and sit there quietly and, be left in peace.
So any plans for the summer? Or are you just going to be head down?
I've got a few more festivals.
I've interviewed writers and they pretend that the festivals are a drudge. And you can see that they love them.
Oh, festivals are great. Book tours are a drudge because you go around town with every day with carrying basically a suitcase of dirty laundry behind you. But a festival is lovely because you get brought to some lovely city, put in a nice hotel. There's other writers there. The events are always beautiful, great, full of readers who like your books and want to talk to you, and you're with your own people in that sense. And I love those. So I've got one in Germany, I've got one in Spain, I've got one in Bali this side of Christmas. Got the Hinterland one in Kells coming up. They're always the offers keep coming in, which is nice. I suppose when they stop coming in, I'll know I've done something wrong.
Well,
Hasn't happened yet, though.
You haven't done anything wrong there so far. So, not on the eyes of rational people.
Yeah.
And don't let the bastards grind you down.
They don't.
John Boyne.
Thank you.
From the crew and the State of Us. Thank you so much for coming in. It's been fantastic.
Thank you.